So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to get the evening started with the introduction of our Executive Director of the Tayshoff Center for Inclusive Higher Education, Beth Myers.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. I'd like to first start off with just a few thank yous. I'd like to thank SULA and especially Joan Adler and her team. They've done a fantastic job putting this all together with the food and the drinks and the venue, and everything has been really wonderful. I'd like to also thank the Syracuse University School of Education, the support that we've gotten from Dean Joanna Massangila, my team at the Tayshoff Center, especially Carly Grafassi, who has done a tremendous amount of work to put this together, Heather Waters, and the rest of the Tayshoff Center team. The Tayshoff Family Foundation, who makes not just tonight possible, but all of the work we do with Inclusive U and the Tayshoff Center for Inclusive Higher Ed. I'd like to thank all of our panelists tonight, Dan Habib, Amy Brenneman, Carrie Rosen, Andy Arias, Brent Elder, and Micah Fialka-Feldman, who I'll introduce in a little while. I'd also like to thank our California partners, especially the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, Cal State, Cal Tash, and all of our partners who really helped to spread the word about this event tonight. I'd also really like to thank Amy Hanreddy and our friends at Chime. Thank you. We're so thrilled for the work that you do. And my first job tonight is to introduce a fantastic young woman who is here. She is one of the stars of the show Born This Way. I first got to know Megan Baumgars through a viral video that I show to my students every semester, where Megan talks about, it's a video called Don't Limit Me, and Megan talks about the ways that we should that we should really think about not limiting people with disabilities. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Megan Baumgars.
I'm a small person.
How about that?
Okay. I'm really doing this here. Gosh, I'm Megan Baumgars, and I'm really nervous, but I'm not going to. What I want to say, I want to say hi to all the people out here today, and thank you for making my dreams to come true. So thank you. Hi. I wanted to welcome to a Syracuse University and the Redefining Inclusion event here tonight. My name is Megan Baumgars from the Emmy award-winning show Born This Way on A&E. I am a former student at the University of Colorado from a film studies department. I am also a co-teacher with my favorite professor teacher, Dr. Christy Kaska, teaching a class called Early and Childhood Inclusive Education, teaching teachers about the importance of inclusion and what has meant for my life right now. I am able to follow my dream of going to college because a program like the Inclusive Initiative. I am very proud that all people with disabilities that have dreams of going to college now have that opportunity to realize their potential. I am very proud to be here tonight with my friend Sean from the audience. I wanted to thank him for coming here tonight. from Born This Way, and our amazing, incredible film crew that's now filming here tonight. We will all continue to work as hard as we can to educate the world about inclusion. And thank you and enjoy your evening. Thank you.
You did a great job. I think she was less nervous than I was. Okay, so let me tell you about how the evening's gonna go. First, we are gonna watch our film preview, and then I'm gonna introduce our panelists. Then we'll do some conversation with the panelists, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Sound good? Okay, that's the plan. So first, I'd like to thank our filmmaker, Dan Habib. Who has been so generous in his work in the disability field. He's allowing us to watch a preview of his film tonight. This is a 14-minute preview of a full-length feature documentary that will be released next year. The film, with the working title Intelligent Lives, focuses on 3 central themes. The first is the history and legacy of intelligence testing. It also focuses on how narrow perceptions of intelligence continue to disproportionately limit people with disabilities. And then it also introduces an emerging paradigm of inclusion. Without further ado, Intelligent Lives.
Our son Jesse had cerebral palsy and could not speak. And they told us he would never be able to learn to read or write. And it was suggested to us that he be placed in a separate classroom or a different school. My wife, Marianne, and I fought to have Jesse included in general education. He used a computer to communicate, became a straight-A student, wrote poetry, and aced every one of his Latin tests. Then one year, the school insisted that Jesse take the Stanford Binet IQ test. Now, this test contains just absurd, antiquated questions like, Jesse, do you dust a dresser? And Marianne and I are thinking, dust? My wife and I don't dust. We call dressers bureaus. And anyway, dusting wasn't a chore I had thought to assign to my child with quadriplegia. The IQ test told us nothing about Jesse's potential, about who he was as a person. Can any attempt to measure intelligence predict a person's value or potential to contribute meaningfully to the world?
I'm not sure if I will do a meditation tonight because I'm kind of tired, but...
All right, sounds good. I'll see you in the morning.
Okay, you too. Bye.
All right, bye.
I had a good night of teaching my class tonight at Syracuse University.
I had a good night teaching my class tonight at Syracuse University.
I'm looking forward to having a good day tomorrow. Hope everyone had a good Monday and a good start to their week.
The world is moving to the song I hear. Who's that singing when there's passion in my ear? Man, gushing memories, almost lost everything. Fella need them fellas running in the dream. We in the van, where the kids were driving. Saw myself in the Highlands at age 13. And I'm asking questions to the present day me. Moving backwards down.
Lots of people in society probably still think that people with disabilities are not included in their town or in their family, and some people still have the mindset of sending them away. And just relaxing. I like saw a sheet of paper in the mail that said I had a 40 IQ still in. When I Googled it, it was somebody that can't do tons of things, probably can't teach at a university. Yeah. Here's my mom, my dad, and my youngest son throughout first grade through fifth grade. I watched them trying to help me get in regular school, and then it's hard to advocate because it took a long time, but I just know that I learned a lot from my mom and dad.
The first label plastered on my son's tiny forehead was jaundiced. That was soon followed by neurologically impaired, developmentally delayed, learning disabled, low functioning, educable, mentally impaired with learning disabilities. What we want to focus on is not a label, but on what are the supports that a child or a person needs in order to participate in a meaningful way. This whole idea of segregating kids doesn't fit.
All right, put your hands down.
Now, Mike and I live closer to each other than we do to our parents.
Oh, a chair?
And I don't know if anyone knew that that was going to be possible in his life. And it's something that makes me emotional because you just it's just these constant reminders that you don't know what people are gonna do.
Lemonade. Food or not food?
No.
Why not?
It's a drink.
It's a drink. He was very engaged. Anytime I looked in his direction, he had a look on his face that said, come on, keep going. I'm right with you, and I want to learn this stuff. The IQ test measures a very limited potential of our brain to learn and misses all the other stuff, a person's ability to take context, clues from their environment, from other people. It misses entirely a person's desire to engage with other people and their openness to relationships. Micah's got a ton of that.
He's taking really high-level classes at one of the best universities for disability studies. He's working here, and why do you think it is that we don't have more people like Micah at college?
Alfred Binet, the French psychologist, published the first intelligence test in 1905 to identify children that needed educational assistance. Binet stressed that intelligence was a fluid quality, shaped by one's environment and culture, and subject to change over time. The American psychologist Henry Goddard radically altered how the Binet-Simon test was used. In 1908, Goddard insisted that the test was a scientific tool to identify the feeble-minded in our midst. In 1913, the United States government funded Goddard's research to test 29,000 immigrants a week at Ellis Island. Goddard said his results showed that 79% of Italians, 83% of Jews, and 87% of Russians were feeble-minded. Goddard's work fueled a widespread movement called eugenics, which called for eliminating the menace of the feeble-minded through forced sterilization and institutionalization. Eugenics had the support of prominent physicians, professors, governors, presidents, and even the United States Supreme Court. From the 1910s through the 1970s, hundreds of thousands of people were institutionalized, and more than 60,000 people were forcibly sterilized. At the beginning of World War I, the U.S. Army administered IQ tests to nearly 2 million soldiers. Men who scored lower were fit to be privates, but not officers. privates were the most likely to end up on the front lines of battle. During World War II, Hitler cited the U.S. eugenics research as justification for sterilizing and murdering hundreds of thousands of Germans with disabilities. Recent studies have shown IQ test results are biased by factors such as socioeconomic status and cultural background. For example, African American students are almost twice as likely as white students to be classified with intellectual disability. Despite its destructive roots and flaws, IQ testing is alive and well. 49 of 50 states still use IQ testing as an assessment tool to determine whether a student is labeled as intellectually disabled. Once a student is labeled, they are often segregated in separate classrooms from typically developing children. In the United States, only 17% of students with intellectual disability are fully included in general education classrooms. One high school in Boston is showing that all students, including those with significant disability, can succeed in general education.
How many P's are there?
Like 2.
2, so 9P what?
Square.
Good. Write that in that first box.
I don't know what Nair's IQ is. What I do know is that Nair is a committed, hardworking student who has some challenges.
I'm gonna need you on your paper.
And Nair, after you paint, you're gonna do 1, 2, 3, right? Cover something up, and then what are you gonna do? You're gonna step back behind this line here, right? He's gonna take the picture. What are you gonna paint that makes you happy? What are you going to tell me? Show me. Nair has a style of his own, and he's not afraid to go in there and freely draw and express himself and capture line and color and movement. And I don't think he really knows how talented he really is. If I got half of that from some of my other students, I'd be happy, because that determination he has is something that is just in him. He cannot give that up. He has to do it.
She's white.
She's white?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is she a human or mermaid or what? A mermaid? You don't know? No. Okay, so what else do you have to do?
He gets frustrated a lot because what he has in his head is hard for it to come out of his mouth.
How many men were killed at Gettysburg? So we're looking for a what? Looking for...
It's not like the movies, where you get this teacher that comes in, she saves the day, and everything's great.
You guys come to the circuit.
It's one day at a time.
You guys can use your study guides. I wouldn't even use the notebook. I would literally just use the study guide while we play Jeopardy. Yeah, guys.
I think that intelligence looks different for everybody. It's clear that he has an intellectual impairment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he can't be intelligent.
Please describe why our unit on government is the most important thing you will learn in all of high school and possibly your life. Nair.
You have learned about the government because you will use this information for when you vote.
That is very true. You will use this information when you vote. I will add that. 3 branches of government.
The fact that he is a black man and he is tall. Sometimes it is troubling to wonder what might the outside world perceive him as. If he's being loud or jumpy or enthusiastic, somebody might perceive that as being threatening. It's one thing when they're young and they're cute, but eventually they're going to get older, they're going to go through puberty, and the outside world is going to see them very differently.
I remember them saying something about his IQ level, and I think it was like 80 or 90. How? Who developed that IQ? So we're using a testing rubric based on the 19th century or the early 20th century, and we're using that in 2015, 2020 to define our children's mental capacity? Nah, I can't buy that.
As a mother, I'm not going to try to fix him or change him. I accept him for who he is. You look and see what they're good at, and you nurture that. That's just being a parent. He is going to college. It's not a hope. He is going.
It's a game. Walked in, 30,000 in my pocket, had them getting like, ooh. $50,000 on you, you want me, gotta screaming like, ooh. Cause I got a check, nigga on the flip, I ain't got a flip, but I got it, ooh. Get out some mix, she gon' wanna sit, every nigga in the set, and now she screaming like, ooh. How much you made? Made $2 million off of me, tell you, and I'm like, ooh. Walked in, 30,000 in my pocket, had them getting like, ooh. $50,000 on you want me, gotta screaming like, ooh. Cause I got a check, nigga on the flip, I ain't got a flip, but I got it, ooh. Get out some mix, she gon' wanna sit, every nigga in the set, and now she screaming like, ooh. How much you made? Made $2 million off of me, tell you, and I'm like, ooh. They tried to drop me with a case, but you know I hadn't skated. I was singing like, ooh. I swung in the boy, I know my role and I play. I do. If you heard that I'm talking, then I said it. I did. Coin, where you at? At the top of the loft, in I stay. I'm a bad boy, but I don't wear big clothes like me. In the club, and a nigga in the bitty poppin'. And then when she want a free drink, tell the bitch to get up off it. Hey, I'm the nigga to get it poppin'. Her hair short like Denny Rock. At the clip point, we flying. When I landed, boy, I walked in. 30,000 in my pocket, had them getting good just like, ooh.
Our first panelist is the filmmaker Dan Habib. Dan is the creator of the award-winning documentaries including Samuel and Who Cares About Kelsey, and many other films on disability-related topics. He's a filmmaker at the University of New Hampshire's Institute on Disability. In 2014, Dan was appointed by President Obama to the President's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities, and he has been nominated for and received numerous awards for his work in disability media. Our next speaker tonight is Carrie Rosen. Carrie is a writer on ABC's show Speechless. An episode she co-wrote, R.A.Y. Raycation, was nominated for a Writers Guild Award for Best Episodic Comedy. Prior to Speechless, she was a writer on Faking It on MTV and Chasing Life on ABC Family. Thank you for joining us, Carrie. Okay, our next star, Micah Fialka Feldman. Micah is a national speaker, a self-advocate, and a pioneer who fights for disability justice and inclusion. Micah earned a certificate in disability studies at Syracuse University in 2015 through Inclusive U. He's a teaching assistant at SU's School of Education, my teaching assistant, among others, and he works at the Tayshoff Center as the outreach coordinator. In May of 2014, Micah was appointed by President Obama to the President's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities. Thank you for joining us, Micah. We also have Dr. Brent Elder. Brent is a first-year assistant professor at Rowan University and a graduate of Syracuse University. Dr. Elder's research focuses on the development of sustainable, inclusive education practices in under-resourced schools. He conducted his doctoral research in Kenya as a Fulbright scholar, and at Syracuse, he was invited by Micah to be on his circle of support. Next, we have the actress, Amy Brenneman. Amy is an actor, producer, and activist. She is known for her roles on NYPD Blue, Judging Amy, Fear, and currently The Leftovers. Amy co-founded the Cornerstone Theater Company, which specializes in community-based original theater pieces centered on themes of social justice. She produced and directed the documentary, The Way the World Should Be, about the trailblazing work of the Chime Institute and its mission of inclusive education. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, we have Andy Arias. Andy is an advocacy professional who gives trainings at universities, high schools, and to congressional leaders on ADA compliance and the inclusion of people with disabilities and others from diverse backgrounds and communities. He has received several awards for his presentations on LGBTQ diversity and disability equality. He sits on the President's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities. Andy advocates in the entertainment industry by creating visible pathways as an actor and a stand-up comedian. And he's often asked to consult with producers and directors in creating greater media visibility of people with disabilities. Thank you for joining us, Andy. Okay, so I'm going to open it up for a couple of questions with the panels here, and then we'll take it from the audience. But my first question is going to go to our big star of the night, Micah. Micah, it's a pretty big deal to let a camera crew follow you around for several years. Why did you agree to do this documentary?
I agreed to do this film because I think to show how the test is like it's like a test that has to get done for services, but to show that it is just like a number and somebody who can teach at a big college and have like a 40 IQ and teach at Syracuse.
Thanks, Micah. Dan, we are big fans of your other films, including Samuel and Who Cares About Kelsey. Why did you decide to focus on intellectual disability next?
Well, first of all, thank you, Syracuse, for all the co-partners for this event. It's incredible. And thank you all for taking time out of your nights to be here. We really appreciate it. It's an honor to be on this panel. It's amazing. So I guess I have to go back a little bit. Some of you may know that I have a son, Samuel, who's including Samuel, who's used a wheelchair since he was about 8 months old. Is now a high school junior. He's taking chemistry. He just passed his midterm yesterday. He's on a, whoa, there we go. I think that's working. Now we can talk. So he's on a path towards graduation with a regular diploma, involved in all kinds of extracurricular things. But since he was very young, he has been perceived as being less intelligent just because he has a disability. And actually, it's a great story from when he was a freshman in high school. He took a history and culture class. And they had to create their own societies and create their own rules for these societies. So Samuel created 3 rules for this society of his. The first one was you get to watch SportsCenter every day, no matter what. The second was if you yell, you are getting detention. And the third one, the harshest penalty, was say for if you talk to me like I'm a 2-year-old, you go to jail. But I think that unfortunately has been our experience, that because Samuel has a disability, he's perceived as being less intelligent. And so when I started thinking about this film, it really started with the former dean of education at Syracuse University, Doug Bicklin, who said to me about 5 years ago when I was doing Who Cares About Kelsey, if you could do a documentary that challenges the way we perceive intelligence, and really deconstructs that and show a new paradigm for what intelligence can look like, that would be a great service to the field. And we are not going to advance as a society in terms of disability rights until we redefine the way we perceive intelligence. So I thought about kind of 2 approaches to that. One was, looking back historically to some extent. And my friend Chris Cooper, some of you may know the actor, he's an amazing advocate. He and his wife Marianne Leone are friends of ours because they also had a child with CP, Jesse, who unfortunately died of a seizure about 10 years ago, but they have remained huge inclusion advocates. So Chris agreed for free to do the narration and be in the film. And I think it's important to look back historically to some extent because, if you think of a movement like Black Lives Matter today, I don't think you would understand the power and the resonance and the importance of that movement unless you knew that we were a country with a history of slavery and racism and systemic segregation. And I don't think you can understand the importance and the critical need for progressive disability rights and inclusion unless you understand the history that we're going to touch on in this film. So that's going to be a small piece of the film. But the larger piece is, Micah, thank you for letting me film you for the last 2 years. There's a lot more that you're going to learn about Micah through this film than you saw in the trailer. But I think that Micah and Nair and my third subject, Naomi, who I'll just mention briefly, are paradigm shifters for the way that we can look at human capacity and value and potential that has absolutely no way to be quantified. And I think that's really at the heart of this. I mean, IQ testing is kind of an entry point to this issue, and it's an important one to debunk and to attack directly. But we have to really see this much more broadly, as Beth and her colleagues at the university are doing, to say people with disabilities can participate in every single aspect of our society. Every person with a disability should be able to participate in every aspect of our society. And I think we can settle for nothing short of that. So just really quickly to wrap up, Naomi, the third subject who I've been filming for the last year, represents the employment realm, because it's great to be included in high school like Nair, and it's very important, and it's important for Micah to be going to college, but without employment, that's a huge gap. So Naomi went to a high school in Rhode Island that was a sheltered workshop, meaning she was basically doing forced labor in this high school, being pulled out of her academic classes to fulfill jewelry orders for 50 cents an hour. Now, thankfully, the U.S. Department of Justice sued Rhode Island in 2013, and in 2014, they settled, and they're closing down all the sheltered workshops in Rhode Island and transitioning everyone into integrated paid employment. And I'm filming Naomi's transition from the sheltered workshop into integrated employment. So thank you. So anyway, I just want to say that I don't make film. I like filmmaking and I like the art of filmmaking, but I really see it more of like as a tool for social work and activism. And I just hope that you all can join me when this film comes out in about a year in getting it out there and making positive change in the world. So thank you for being here and for having us. Thanks.
So now I'm going to flip the question to Amy, because I think you have gone through something sort of similar as from being a parent to being an advocate. So can you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, what an amazing panel. Thanks, Amy. I do anything Amy Henready tells me to do. It always works out really well. Well, honestly, I know this is something parents say in general, but I feel like my world was so limited before. It's just, there's no other way to put it. It's like I grew up in, suburbia, and I don't know where the special ed kids were. I went to a big public high school. I mean, it kills me. It's like, oh, that would have been my daughter, But they were not, and so you just go to high school and you go to college, and then my daughter came along, and from the get, she just was a really unique spirit and a really different kind of brain. And, all this testing, Dan, it's like, from the time she was 2 years old, it's like she tests in the 1%. Like anytime she's in the 2%, I was like, right on, woo. But it's like, and now it's like, tell me something I don't know. There was some, I was like, oh, really? That's great. Well, that's an improvement, But it was terrifying. It was terrifying. And we were lucky enough to get into Chime Charter School when she was in first grade. Well, this is actually, we started out, I always like to trash this teacher that, let's tell his stories. But she got an IEP for mostly speech, but she never had a diagnosis. So that was where it's really interesting too, because over the years, I would say this, not actually just kidding. I would say, I wish I could be in the Down syndrome club. Like that, we were orphans. We were absolutely orphans. We had autistic friends, we had folks with physical disabilities, so we were in a Waldorf school when she was really young, and it was really lovely, actually. And then they're like, well, when it gets to the academics, and and so at that point, she was in speech, she was in this, she was in that. So I said to the first grade teacher, here's her information speech person. And she was like, Waldorf's lovely, but this woman was like, I just want to meet her and let's not categorize her. I was like, okay, but I'm telling you, you're going to want to talk to the, and from the first day, she literally was like, I don't know how to handle her. And my daughter, who does not have behavioral problems, was playing by herself in the dirt. And I was like, I'm going to be talking about you the rest of my life. Anyway,
And you are.
And I am. Anyway, when we got into Chime, it was the beginning of, it was like, you feel it in your bones. That's what people always say. Like, it's like, I want to be here. Something feels really good about it. And, basically it was like, you stop looking at normal, abnormal, typical, atypical, and you look in terms of strengths and challenges. And that is absolutely the way I look at myself, at my daughter, and I think when you're in an inclusive place, like, not only, it's just the paradigm keeps shifting, right? So for a while, because Charlotte doesn't have any visible disability, right? So hers is more intellectual and cognitive. I realized I was holding my breath, will she pass? And then I was like, ooh, I'm still holding on to hope she fits into the typical world. And I feel like each year that just starts blowing apart some more. So it just got, not only to support her, but, I started, when I got to Chime, there were a couple fundraisers that they were doing, but none of them felt like Chime to me. They were all sort of like good-hearted and, hi. Family. So I said, I'm a theater artist. Can I put, Amy Henready? Can I hijack your institution and create this thing? And we created something called Chime-a-Palooza, which was spirited and wacky and weird. But the second year, I think, I said, let's just tell the story. And it was super political. I was like, I don't know what this has to do with fundraising. But basically through Amy, we had transcripts of Brown versus Board of Education and then IDEA in 1975. And it was startling. It was like, it'll never work and it'll be disruptive and it's a crazy idea. And then it's like, hey, it's working and it benefits everybody. So that's when it became a civil rights issue to me. And it became a civil rights issue, just like it was about segregation.
Thanks. Andy, on to you. Can you tell us a little bit about how your own life path? I think your backstory is so interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about how your own life path brought you to this advocacy work?
Well, yes. First of all, I'd like to say that I wish I had cool parents like Dan and Amy growing up. You guys would have made my life incredibly easier.
They are pretty cool.
Yeah, they're very, very.
We're not married. You realize we're not.
No. I'm just
the way he said that was
separately.
weird.
I wish.
Make my wife very jealous right now.
Well, high marks for you. No, I just wish that I grew up in foster care. I grew up in the system, and I don't look at that as a deficit in my life. I actually look at it as an asset to making me do national policy and moving the progression of disability forward. I really had to steer away from the system because it was very institutionalized in the way that people viewed me, whether it's because my butt's in a chair or whether it's because my intelligence level or the way that I learned was different than everybody else. And I really had to push away all the systems, even the current systems that are out there that said you're not going to be independent, you're not going to live on your own, you're not going to have a job, you're not going to go to college, you're not going to drive a car. It took me 6 years to get my driver's license because the DMV was like, hell no, we're not giving you your license because you can't turn your damn head. And I was like, but there's mirrors that give me a full view of the street, so I'm cool. And so I've always turned my nose into yeses, and I've always turned my disability into an asset. So when people said that your disability is going to hold you back, I always thought to myself, from a young age, it's going to pull me forward. It's going to push me. I know I'm different. I know I stand out. Sore thumb, you look it up in the dictionary, and it's me, you know? And I relish that because there's not LGBTQ/disability experience out there. And if that's my cross to bear, then it's fine. But what I do have to say is that everybody with a disability that I've encountered through my advocacy work or through the program that I developed in Orange County, teaching youth to be independent and transition to college when people wanted to stick them into sheltered workshop, everybody with a disability has an untapped potential. They learn differently. That's all it is. And when we look at disability, if we change the view and perception of what it is, it's no different than someone being African American or Hispanic or somebody having blonde hair. You know, it's the same thing. I'm in a wheelchair. Well, guess what? Eventually, everyone's going to be disabled. Whether it's an accident or whether it's old age, y'all are going to get there. So you might want to get used to it and comfortable with the fact that you might be pretty now, you might be sitting tall, but eventually you're going to need some type of assistance or an accommodation, right? So if you view it in that perspective, it'll change your perception.
Thanks, Andy. I know, we always say that. Fight the good fight now when you're in a position of power, because someday you might not be. Carrie, I'm going to just gush about your work for a minute. Carrie is a writer for the show Speechless, which is new this year. And when she first came in tonight, I was saying to her, I just have this episode that I love. It's the H.E. Hero episode, where they actually talk about inspiration porn, this idea of like people with disabilities as inspiration, and they name it and they talk about it in mainstream television. And Carrie says, "Oh, I wrote that episode," and I was like, "Oh, we love you." Thank you. You know, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And can you talk a little bit about some of the like national attention that Speechless is garnering in the work that you're doing in exposing issues of inclusion and exclusion to like a really mainstream audience?
I hope there's much, much more, and it gets lots of national attention, and we get renewed. Would be great. Yeah, it's just been kind of amazing to see. You know, sometimes we're in our little bubble of constantly working and not being able to get out of the writer's room and see. But you know, just when I go on Facebook and Twitter, and I've worked on shows where I brace myself to see awful things said on Twitter, and the feedback has been so wonderful, and it just warms my heart so much to see people say, "Oh my God, it's like they have a camera in my house." You know, I grew up with a brother with severe autism, and I feel the same way. I would have loved to have a show like this growing up, and I'm so happy I get to be a part of it now. And just like hearing, and this is so cheesy, but you know, just hearing that one person can be moved by it just makes it all the most amazing experience.
And so how do you as writers really get to this piece where people say, "Oh, it feels like it's in my house"? Like, how do you get this authenticity about disability in what is fiction?
Well, you know, we try to do our homework. I have my own experiences, and our creator, Scott Silveri, who is totally the brains of the show, and I'm here on his behalf just because he's too busy actually running the show to do anything else. But yeah, he grew up with a brother with cerebral palsy, and we have a number of consultants who come and talk to us, and we have obviously our lead actor, Micah, who gives his input. We've talked to his parents, and yeah, we're just trying to take in everything and listen to everyone, and also just as we get to know JJ better, it kind of just, and we understand who he is and how his disability isn't who he is, but it informs who he is very much. It's just kind of unfolding itself in a way that's very exciting.
Thank you. Brent, you're the last one that is getting a question from me right now. Brent, can you just talk a little bit about some of the work that's happening around disability and inclusion, and sort of what's next? Like, what are our charges here? We're talking about how disability is getting a lot more exposure than it has in the past, but where are we making the big inroads now?
Yeah. Thank you everyone for coming. It's good to see you. Thank you for the panel. But I think what we have to really think about is disability representation in the media and in the ways that we interact with people, in the things that we do every day, in the classrooms that we inhabit at Syracuse University. If we go down this line, we see Andy that does a lot of policy work in DC, but also lived experience, doing stand-up comedy and talking about intersectionality, right? We're not just disabled and gay, or it's everything kind of intersects, and that's really important to talk about. We see that in the Women's March. We saw a lot of intersectionality, right? So that's really important to be visible. Dan and his work with his newest film and his other work, Carrie doing it for Speechless, Micah doing it at Syracuse University. We were in the same disability studies program. When I was working as a teacher in Goleta, working in a segregated classroom, I was looking at other examples like Chime with Amy Hanratty and Shauna's work at Wish with Katie Sloan. Finding those models of representation that are intersectional and disability positive, and really talking about what it means to be diverse with many different identities is really important. And so I took that upon myself, because in the sphere of influence that I had was my elementary school that was segregated, working in a segregated classroom, and really looking at, this isn't right. We don't live in a world like this. It's not the sanitized kind of segregated place, and it's certainly not the world that I want to live in. And I think that, in the stuff that you're doing with Chime and Chime-a-Palooza, and the theater work that you're doing, and in particular the Tayshoff Center at Syracuse University, getting to work with Beth Myers, seeing how they're really challenging the issue of intelligence, and then seeing inclusion happening in a meaningful way, working with Micah, learning with Micah, being friends with Micah at Syracuse, and seeing it happen in a massive way. Beth just got a $5 million grant to do this type of work at higher education with disability. So that deserves a round of applause, I think. And having events like this where it's visible. We have the camera and the media here, but also really challenging what it means to have a disability, and disability positive identities is really important first step. And people can be really critical about disability as spectacle on TV or as in movies or whatever, but I think that it's better to have that as a source of digestible kind of medium that we can all then talk about, and then have discussions on social media about it, because I think it's better to exist and be visible than to be invisible and hidden, because that justifies a lot of segregation and abuse that is so prevalent in the disability rights movement. So I see these types of events really being important, and in the sphere of influence that we all have and kind of exist in, pushing back against those norms of the dominant perspectives of disability as being negative.
Okay, I'm gonna let us start taking some questions from the audience, because we ran out of time last night. There were just so many questions. So I wanna start a little bit earlier with questions from the audience tonight. We have such a great group up here. I could ask questions really for the next several hours, but I won't do that. I will let you guys ask some questions, because I know there are some out there. Feel free to raise your hand. We have 2 people with microphones.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, thanks for coming.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited for the film. First of all, thank you to the panelists. It was really great hearing from your perspectives. Also, Brett, if I got your name right, hopefully.
You got it.
Okay, yes. So you mentioned about intersectionality. I think that is really important, especially when you mentioned how we're not supposed to be invisible and hidden, because of the fact with ableism, discrimination towards disabled people is a continuous thing. It still happens, which affects, which causes internalized ableism, which is an internal conflict that a disabled person may go through, where they don't want to identify with their disability or as a disabled person. So thank you for mentioning that. So I have 2 questions. Okay. First question, this is for anyone in the panel. Why do you think this film is important to be released right now?
I can speak to that. I didn't know how cool you were, Dan. I'll be honest.
My kids don't agree, but that's all right.
I've heard you speak, and I was like, yeah, he's all right. But I saw this film, and it really got me thinking, because I think disability history is not spoken about. Our movement of civil rights is very similar to every historical diverse community, like the African American or the Jewish community or the Hispanic community. And I've done a lot of work on the intersectionality between the two civil rights communities, between the three civil rights communities. And what I found is discrimination is discrimination across the board, and every community, whether it's disability or Hispanic, has faced the same barriers. But yet, how many times have we helped each other out? You know, how many times have we gone to each other and said, you know what, you're facing discrimination here. Let me interject. Let me help you out. The Jewish community and the disabled community during the Holocaust went through exactly the same thing. The gas chambers were tested on disabled individuals before they were tested on the Jews. And nobody knew that until somebody brought it to their attention. So what that says to me is that there needs to be more inclusiveness. And I thank you for your film for addressing that, because what it says is that we're all the same. And when people start realizing the uniqueness but the similarity of all of us, then we can start moving forward. That's why I think that's
Thank you for the question. I'll chime in a little bit. And thank you, Andy. So I think that when Amy said something earlier about segregation, and I think that we really need to call this what it is. You know, we have these pillars in our society, or different silos of regular education, special education, sheltered workshops, regular work, and I think that when you think of other civil rights movements, whether it's the gay rights movements, African American movements, women's rights movements, they often started with a law, like a major civil rights law, or the marriage equality laws. But what I think really made permanent, sustainable change was two things: kind of grassroots activism that enforced those laws, but also it became the norm to make sure the people who had been oppressed all these years were no longer being oppressed to the same degree. Now, we have a long way to go when it comes to all these civil rights movements. I don't want to suggest that they're over by any stretch. But when I look at for the gay rights movement, for example, I think one of the things that has created, I hope, some sustainable and permanence to it is that as people become friends, neighbors, people in their family come out as being gay, you just can't go back. There's a level of acceptance, especially among younger people, that no matter what the political stripe is, they want people to have equal rights to love who they want to love, to marry who they want to love, to marry who they want to marry. And I don't think there's any turning back. For disability rights and inclusion, I don't think we're going to have permanent, sustainable inclusion and desegregation until our schools make it the norm that kids with and without disabilities are learning together every day. And I don't think you can teach inclusion. I think you have to experience it. And I think that once kids growing up experience this, and once they see it in the media again and again through Speechless and Born This Way and the film I'm trying to make, once they see it in pop culture, once they experience it in their lives, once they understand the laws, and once people fight to keep those laws enforced, which we're probably going to need to do a lot of, in the near future, that's when I think the type of social change that we've made in progress becomes irreversible. And that's where I hope we're going.
Thank you. And I think you had a second part to your question, right?
Okay, second question. Okay, so this is to Carrie. Okay, so Speechless has garnered a lot of social media attention. So I was wondering, I'm not sure this is like a big guess here, but hopefully. Are you aware of this hashtag Speechless Twitter chat that was created by hashtag Film This and the Disability Visibility Project? Are you aware of that?
I'm not.
Oh, well, it's basically many disabled people coming together and chatting, saying, hey, maybe we should address this to the writers, maybe they should fix this, or, stuff like that. So yeah, you should totally check it out.
Find me on Twitter at Carrie Rosen.
Yeah.
So much of the feedback we've been getting, and I did not feel we were a show with a huge social media presence, which is something I'd like to work on as like a young person on staff. But yeah, like, a lot of times, for instance, we have an episode coming up where that addresses why JJ doesn't use a communication device, which is something that came up with the feedback that we've gotten, and even why don't Maya and Jimmy seem more like a passionate married couple we address coming up. So we definitely want to hear from everyone, and please leave us into that discussion. Find me on Twitter.
We will do that for sure. For sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, well, thank you all for being here, first of all. And this is a hallelujah moment for me. I have been waiting for somebody to take on IQ tests ever since my son was diagnosed with autism in 1997. IQ tests almost ruined his life. They were ready to put him away, and I'm happy to say that he ultimately graduated high school and surprised me last year by getting his driver's license. So much for IQ tests. Thank you. My question, though, to you guys is, yesterday my now 22-year-old son came to me with tears in his eyes and asked me if President Trump was going to take away his health care. And several of you have mentioned working with President Obama. I want to know if any of you have a plan now to engage the new administration in advocacy.
Ooh, good question.
Sorry if it's a tough question.
Who wants to start?
Right, speechless.
I can start.
Okay, we'll let Dan
So
start.
we do have a plan to some degree. Well, first of all, Micah, Andy, and I will remain on the presidential committee through at least September of 2017, which is when the charter runs out for that committee, and then Trump would have to reauthorize it. So hopefully, our charge is to create recommendations directly to the president. Whether the president listens to them or not is a whole other issue, but that's our charge. So that's one way. But the other thing is that, as I said earlier, film is really, for me, a medium to achieve other things. And whenever I do a film, we come out with a Take Action campaign. And we actually, on May 9th, we're bringing together about 25 major national organizations that work in disability rights, that work in employment. I mean, all the big leading disability rights education organizations, the teachers unions, everybody. And we're gonna have a strategy summit as to how to use this film to create the most positive social change and impact nationally and internationally. And we're working on specific actions, policies, congressional briefings, I mean, you name it. Whatever we can do to leverage the power of this film to create more inclusion, more disability rights, more employment, more opportunities, that's what we're gonna do. So, I mean, whether Trump listens to it or not, I mean, a lot of things can happen in this country at the grassroots level and the community level. And I genuinely believe that it's easy to get overwhelmed by what's happening nationally, but each of you, I think Brent used the word spheres of influence, each of you need to think about your sphere of influence and what you can affect, whether it's your local school, your family, your neighborhood. Some of you have bigger spheres of influence than others. Work in that sphere and don't get overwhelmed. And I think we'll be okay if we all keep focused on that.
Thank you.
We were having a conversation last week about it also hurts us, right? It hurts, typical people or average people or normal people. Everyone is like, if I don't go through my life interacting with people who are different than me, whatever that may look like, then I don't know how to interact with those people once I leave high school. So I'd just be curious if there's anything you can speak to.
Lots of people on the panel can probably answer this question in different ways. But so what I'll say briefly, first, it's really important to note that the research around inclusion for students with disabilities is irrefutable. 30 years of research shows that kids who are included in general ed end up with better academic outcomes, better employment outcomes, better relationship outcomes, social, emotional, and I've never seen a study that has shown outcomes that are decreased in any way for those students with disabilities if they are in separate, segregated programs. I've also never seen a study that shows any negative implications on quote-unquote typical kids who are learning in inclusive environments. And in fact, there's a great study out of Vanderbilt recently by this great researcher, Eric Carter, who looked at groups of students with and without disabilities working together collaboratively, preparing for tests and their exams and homework. And then he compared them against just a monolithic group of students without disabilities, preparing for the same work. In that mixed group of kids with and without disabilities, the typical kids were scoring an average of 15 points higher on their exams. Wow. And when he parsed the data and did some more follow-up research, he found that when the kids were working together alongside their friends with disabilities, they were more engaged in the curriculum. They wanted to be good friends, mentors, peers. They really wanted to work on this together to problem solve and to make sure that their peers were understanding the material, they were reteaching the material, so they were learning it more. So I think there's like all this intangible benefits around social and emotional, but there's also academic benefits. Actually, I wanted to flip it to Carrie on this question because I was wondering, as a sibling of somebody with a disability, like how that's a huge question, but like how it's affected you, and particularly around your writing and your work on the show, because you grew up, like my son Isaiah has, as a typical kid around disability. Can you speak to that at all? Because I think it's linked to your question.
It affects everything about me every day, every minute. That made me think about, I feel my friends growing up benefited so much more from knowing my brother. Like, they are people who would have gone their whole lives without knowing anyone. And now they've come back to me and said, oh, later in my life, I'm so happy I knew Nikki. He's my brother. And I remember in first grade, I had a lot of feelings all the time. Like, I felt different. Like, I felt like I was going through something at a younger age that other kids weren't. And in first grade, I realized that a couple other girls in my class had brothers with disabilities. And I was like, let's all get together and write a book about it. And they were like, okay. And so we each wrote a chapter. It was like our special brothers and sisters. And there's one girl with a sister with a heart condition. And I was like, okay, sure, you're in. And in retrospect, I was like, that kind of show ran that thing. That was me organizing other writers into a project, and years later I wrote inspiration porn, which is making fun of my own experiences writing. Like, my family's different from other families. So yeah, I definitely feel, and one of those girls actually reached out to me a few years ago to say, oh, thank you. You teaching me how to write about my brother helped me process it. I was pretty special as a kid. So yeah, I definitely feel like everyone can benefit from knowing someone with a disability, and no matter where on the spectrum it is, it affects everyone, I think. Thanks for taking that.
No, but I want to piggyback on that, and just the language we use is strengths and challenges. It's like, what can you do? What do you need help with? And I will always remember Charlotte, I think she was in first or second grade, and she was really struggling with that number 9. And then her smarty pants little brother's doing math, and I'll always remember her clocking it. And I caught it, and I was like, yeah, you have to work really hard at math. But you know what? Your friend Joshua has to work really hard at walking. And because it was right in her community and among her friends, and it was so tangible, I was like, oh my God, that's actually true. You don't have struggles in some areas, and you do have struggles in some areas, and then you can help that person. And I think that really is the global way of again, sort of and this is what I'm struggling. It's like, how do you have, to your point, or to your question, Christina, how do you have a cohesive advocacy group? Which is the disability, just people coming together and forming a number of people. But understanding it's fluid enough that when you watch a person struggle with an illness or struggle, it's just these abilities come and they go, and psychological and emotional, for those of us that have struggled in therapy, it's like, that's a disability, what are we calling a disability? And I think that even sort of reframing and relanguaging some of this could be an exciting direction, movement.
Really want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. I'm so honored to be up here with this panel. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful night.